around 2:15 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, 1995, in Fairfax, Virginia. 911 operators received a call that the Harper residence was on fire. When firefighters arrived at the house, fire and smoke masked the horrific scene inside. Once the flames were extinguished and the heavy smoke cleared, emergency personnel found the burnt body of a young woman. When investigators examined the scene, they discovered a rolling pin smeared with blood nearby. Who was this woman, and who was the monster who savagely attacked her on a family holiday and left her to burn in the flames? Hello, and welcome to Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. In each episode, I explore a different case of murder, attempting to unravel the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case. This show is not intended for all audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. Investigators had established that the mother, Elizabeth Harper, had escaped the fire by jumping out of a window from her second-story bedroom. During the fall, she broke her back, yet found the power and strength to reach a neighbor's house to call 911. Her neighbor promptly called the police and then ran back to the burning house. Elizabeth's mother, Delphine Parson, who was 85 at the time of the incident, resided in a basement room in their home. There was no way to access the front, so he ran around to the back of the place, got her attention somehow, and rescued her from the burning residence. Thanks to the brave neighbor who faced the rising smoke and flames to bring this woman to safety, despite her frail teen age, she survived without any injuries. Elizabeth Harper suffered first-degree and second-degree burns in addition to breaking her back, but she remained in stable condition. When the fire had spread throughout his family residence home, 18-year-old Matthew Harper had been sound asleep with his girlfriend at her house. Upon being contacted about the fire, he immediately drove to Fairfax Hospital, where his mother Elizabeth had been admitted. His older sister Anne, though, wasn't there. According to her brother Matt, he, along with Anne, some family members and friends, had dinner together at Outback Steakhouse the night before, since they had planned on spending all day cooking in the kitchen for Thanksgiving. He and Anne then went to the movie theater with friends and watched the 007 film GoldenEye. Matt claimed that he dropped Anne off around midnight or so and went back to his girlfriend's place where he spent the whole night. Initially, the victim was claimed to be an unidentified woman. Officer Anzi Alam, a spokesperson for the police department, told the press that they did not have enough information to determine whether the death was an accident, suicide, or a murder. They did, however, find the circumstances around the woman's death to be suspicious and were confident that someone had been involved in the arson committed and her death. When officers arrived at the hospital to deliver the grim news to Anne's mother Elizabeth and her brother Matt, one officer observed how, although he didn't express any words, Matt's eyes conveyed complete devastation over her death. The burnt body was believed to be the remains of 20-year-old college student Anne Harper, who was visiting her family for the holidays. When crime scene investigators arrived at the scene of the house, they found the remains of Anne Harper lying near the foyer by the living room. She was lying face down with her feet pointing into the living room and her arms and head back toward the foyer. Near the hallway laid a blood-stained rolling pin on the ground. Blood spatter surrounded her body, and the victim had a severe wound to the back of her head. An ignitable fluid had been poured on her back, crossed over into her buttocks and the floor. Investigators noticed an area on the floor that had been protected from the flames that mirrored the imprint of a person. It was believed that the body was placed on the floor and then set on fire. What initially appeared to be a tragic victim of a fire was now a victim of foul play. Anne Harper had not just died in the fire, but she had been brutally attacked and left in the burning house. All evidence pointed to the fire being set to cover up the murder of Anne Harper. Upon entry to the Harper residence, fire investigator Terry Hall noticed a clear pouring pattern of some type of ignitable fluid. On the other side of the living room was a red plastic gasoline container, which indicated intentional arson. A trail of the burn pattern began at the bottom of the stairs, ran up the stairs, and to the doorway of the mother's bedroom. It was also poured inside the bedroom itself. Within the middle of the burn pattern lay a single-bladed knife, around 3 inches wide. Unfortunately, due to the extensive charring of the blade and its handle from the fire, collecting any DNA was next to impossible. Investigators believed that the perpetrator had intended to stab Mrs. Harper after killing her daughter Anne, and that Mrs. Harper may have been the true target. Investigators later that day visited Elizabeth Harper and asked her if she had heard or seen anything unusual the night of the fire. She told officers that while she was in bed, she overheard her daughter say to someone, "What are you doing?" Miss Harper claimed that it wasn't said in a tone that sounded hostile or one that would indicate the person she was speaking to was a stranger. She described it more or less in a high-pitched tone. "What are you doing?" She wasn't overly concerned and didn't bother checking in on the situation. Instead, she used the restroom. When she opened the door, there was smoke and flames everywhere. She attempted to use the phone in the bedroom, but it wasn't working, as somehow it had been disconnected. It was determined by investigators at the house, who were communicating with investigators at the hospital during the questioning of Mrs. Harper, that in the kitchen area was a landline telephone mounted on the wall. The phone receiver had been pulled off so no calls could be placed outside the house. In the kitchen, they noticed how several drawers had been pulled open, which held kitchen-like utensils like spatulas and another which contained knives. Detective Jeff Miller of the Fairfax County Police Department observed no signs of anyone entering the residence by force, except of course by the firefighters. Investigators realized that this heinous crime was not committed by some maniac or some drugged-up burglar, but likely by someone the victim knew. All evidence pointed to a premeditated act of violence committed by someone in the world of the Harper family. Anne Harper was a 20-year-old junior at Hollins College in Roanoke, Virginia. She was a gifted soprano singer and an honors student. Anne shared her beautiful voice with her fellow members at the Episcopalian Church and as part of the chapel choir at Hollins College. She had a passion for cathedrals and had spent an entire semester in Europe, which inspired her to pursue her major in medieval studies. Anne Harper was described as a very bright, kind, generous, and talented young woman. She was admired and seemed to be liked by everyone who knew her. There were no obvious suspects as to who wanted her dead and who could have viciously killed this young woman. That is, until Anne's father, Michael Harper, was tracked down by detectives in New Jersey, where he had lived since divorcing Annemette's mother, Elizabeth, 5 years earlier. While being interviewed by the police, he mentioned how Anne had gotten together with one of her old boyfriends before she went back home for the holidays. She had stopped at Washington and Lee University in Lexington City, Virginia, where her ex-boyfriend attended school, before driving to Fairfax to be with her family. He and Anne had recently parted ways that September, and even though she was upset over the relationship ending, it was said they had ended on amicable terms. Her ex-boyfriend was in Houston, Texas with his family for Thanksgiving, and thanks to the help of the Houston Police Department, they were able to track down his whereabouts. However, he was visibly upset and shocked by the news of Anne's death. The young man fully cooperated with investigators. He said he was in Houston at the time of the fire, which all checked out, and he was eliminated as a suspect rather quickly. Investigators next contacted Hollins College to request contact information for Ann Harper's classmates, professors, and roommates. That same day, Matt Harper was interviewed by a homicide detective and the fire marshal. Investigators noticed that he was barefoot when he arrived at the hospital the night the family house was on fire. This could have been explained away easily if it had been a warm summer day, except that it was late November, and in that part of Virginia during the fall months, the nights dipped into the low 40s and even 30s. There was no rational explanation why Matt Harper was not wearing shoes that night. At the time of his initial questioning at the hospital, investigators had also observed a stain on his jeans, which eerily resembled blood. Matt claimed it was from pasta sauce he and his girlfriend had made a couple nights ago. When asked if they could have his pants for analysis, he handed them over to be tested, without any resistance. Investigators also inquired about his relationship with his sister Ann. Matt claimed that he and Ann had been close and that everything was fine between them. They then asked if they could search his girlfriend's residence, to which he agreed. When investigators arrived at his girlfriend's place with a search warrant, she was guarded and very protective of her boyfriend Matt. However, she allowed them to look around her place, including the bedroom. On one of the pillowcases was a dark, smudged stain. It resembled soot. Matt explained this away by saying that it must have transferred to his face while embracing his mother at the hospital, which detectives found to be bizarre. They requested that the pillowcase also be tested. Investigators learned from several emergency room employees how Matthew's nose and mouth had what appeared to be traces of ember soot. However, they claimed they never saw him hug his mother or show any affection at all toward her. They also reported that there seemed to be an uncomfortable, strained connection between the mother and her son. A nurse reported to detectives that they were not emotional toward one another and their interaction was strange and unnatural. The investigation was ongoing, and 2 weeks after the fire and Ann's death, the autopsy report came in. It revealed that Ann Harper had not died from smoke inhalation, as they initially suspected. She had died from multiple stab wounds to her back caused by a 6-inch blade, in addition to blunt force trauma to her head, which was likely caused by the rolling pin. This young woman, on the night before she was planning to celebrate Thanksgiving with her family and friends, had been viciously assaulted and murdered inside her own home with tools designed to cook a holiday dinner with. On December 14, 1995, the results from Matt Harper's genes arrived. It was proven to be blood, not pasta sauce, as he had claimed, and the blood was identified as belonging to the victim, his sister, Ann Harper. All evidence indicated that Matt Harper had murdered his sister on Thanksgiving morning. When investigators attempted to contact Matt Harper for further questioning, they were informed that he had a family friend now who was representing him as his attorney. Matt's mother also no longer wanted to communicate further with law enforcement. Elizabeth Harper would not cooperate with the investigation and behaved as if she didn't care whether or not the police found her daughter's killer. Homicide investigators felt as if they were the only ones fighting to gain justice for Ann. Although it seemed clear that Matt Harper was the perpetrator, investigators didn't believe they had enough evidence to secure a conviction. No additional information was gathered to help the case push forward, and the investigation stalled. Meanwhile, Matt Harper had decided to major in psychology at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He also did not let the murder of his sister deter him from his strong commitment to the church. Matt Harper was deemed a young, promising leader of the Christian faith and a model student by many who knew him. He was involved in the vestry, the leadership group of the Canterbury Episcopal Campus Ministry. Then, while conducting an annual review of their open fire cases, Investigator Hull looked closely at the case file and remembered something strange. He recalled Matt Harper being barefoot when he arrived at the hospital after the fire. Then, while looking over some notes taken by an officer who had canvassed the area around the Harper house, something caught his eye. This officer had written down how several neighbors had heard dogs barking and saw a car. Then when he looked at photographs of the area and brought up pictures of the general area, he noticed a park southeast of the Harper residence and a creek that ran along it. Investigator Hall suspected that Matt Harper didn't have any shoes on at the hospital because he had thrown them in the creek. It may have sounded like a stretch, but he trusted his instincts. Investigator Hall and another detective walked over to the park. They crossed over a bridge where the creek ran under it in an S shape. At one side of the end of the S lay a large pile of debris. As they shifted through it, Investigator Hall came across one leather shoe. He dug further and found its mate. He knew that in his gut, these were Matt Harper's shoes, but considering they had been sitting outside in the creek for over a year now, any viable evidence would have been lost. The only chance they had to prove these were Matt Harper's shoes was for a toe alignment analysis. So, they were granted a search warrant for a plaster cast to be done off of Matt Harper's feet, in addition to the collection of 3 pairs of his shoes. Investigators arrived at Matt Harper's residence at James Madison University and issued a search warrant. Matt Harper first behaved as if he was confused. He didn't understand why they were there, but then he became visibly angry with this request and resisted complying with officers. However, detectives there sternly reminded him that the alternative was for him to go in front of a judge for not complying with the search warrant. Matt Harper begrudgingly obliged. Once the pieces of this puzzle began to fall into place, homicide detectives established the theory that Matt Harper had not set his family's residence on fire to murder his sister, but rather in an attempt to disguise how he had brutally killed her to cover up any remaining evidence. Investigators also believed that the act of arson was committed with the intent to conceal the murder of his mother, since the knife had been found in her room. However, Elizabeth Harper had thrown her son's sinister plans off when she dove out of the bathroom window of her second-story bedroom to escape the flames. Matt Harper was always the primary suspect in the eyes of homicide detectives. They simply didn't have the evidence necessary nor any clear motive to pursue criminal charges against him. That is, they didn't until they began peeling back the layers of who Matt Harper really was. Upon his initial discussion with police, Matt Harper had pointed officers in the direction of the person who had stolen his expensive bike from inside the garage. He had filed a report for the stolen property and received $3,600 in insurance. This same bicycle was later traced to a consignment shop where Matthew had sold the bike. A friend of Matt's told police officers that one of his friends owned a bike shop. He claimed that Matt would get a bike, dismantle it, and sell the parts to his friend. Then he would make an insurance claim and receive money for the stolen bike. The previous summer, Matt Harper had filed a different claim for another bike that was accidentally burned. This pattern of fraud and deception was beginning to show his true colors, and investigators began to dig deeper. They then discovered 3 additional claims the insurance company had refused to pay since Matt declined to cooperate with their investigations. Then they came across an insurance policy for his mother, which was around $150,000. What really raised a red flag, though, was when a friend of Matt's reported that Matt had mentioned to them one time that if his entire family died, he would receive over $1 million in life insurance benefits. During the same period, the Virginia Crime Lab returned with the results of the shoes. The plaster cast made of Matt Harper's feet perfectly matched the leather shoes thrown in the creek. Almost 2 years after Ann Harper was brutally and senselessly murdered and her body set on fire, her brother, Matt, was brought into custody. At 8 a.m. while attending his sign language class at James Madison University, homicide investigators entered the classroom, took him into custody, and arrested Matthew Harper in the hallway. That Matt Harper was considered to be the culprit behind this brutal crime was shocking to the community, especially to his family, who didn't believe he was guilty. It appeared pretty much everyone believed in his innocence, that is, except for his victim. Anne Harper's journal contained several entries that painted her brother much darker than others perceived him to be. She wrote how things became scary during one particular fight between her brother and their mother over his wanting to live with his father. Matt had cracked one of the doors and punched a hole in the wall. His violence was not limited to the walls of the Harper family's home, though, and according to one entry shared during his criminal trial, Anne had written, and I quote, "Mom and Matt got into an awful fight today. It got physical. Mom has an awful red mark on her right eye, and for a while, her lower face was swollen." In other entries, she wrote about her brother Matt's increasing hostility and aggression shown towards her, asking rhetorically, "Why? I haven't done anything." Even after Matt Harper had been indicted on charges of first-degree murder, he continued to attend his college courses. Unlike many other offenders, his family had complete faith in his innocence and had posted his bond so he could continue living his best life while awaiting his murder trial. Once the prosecution presented him with evidence that allegedly brought to surface the truth of what had happened that day, which he claimed to have repressed, Matthew Harper confessed to murdering his sister and setting his family's home on fire. In his formal confession, he wrote, and I quote, "I remembered in horror that I stabbed my sister. I remembered going upstairs to tell my mother what had happened and that I could not find her. I remembered spreading gasoline. I remembered fleeing the house and the house being on fire when I fled." His confession worked in his favor as the district attorney now decided to strike a plea agreement with the defense counsel. Matt Harper now faced the lesser charge of second-degree murder and arson, while the attempted murder of his mother was dropped. Neither a verbal or written statement was given by Matt Harper as the reasons behind why he murdered his sister. Deputy Commonwealth's attorney Raymond F. Moreau was understandably cynical toward the so-called repressed memories that led to Matt Harper's confession. As he described the crime, the defendant's actions were brutal, savage, and rather methodical in the killing of his sister. He also presented to the court how when shown photos of his dead sister's body in an earlier hearing, Matt Harper continued to deny being the perpetrator, and he conveyed no emotion over seeing these morbid pictures of his sister Anne. It was presented to the court that Anne Harper's murder was motivated by financial gain. Specifically, Matt Harper had planned to collect the insurance money he would receive if his sister and mother were both dead. The prosecution presented the following sequence of events. Around 2 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, Matt Harper returned to his mother's residence and snuck into the house from the garage. Anne Harper was up late, studying, and caught her brother in the act as he was about to set the house on fire. He was going to get caught, and he had to hush her up. Matt ran into the kitchen, grabbed the rolling pin and knife, and returned to the living room to confront Anne. He bashed her in the back of the head with the rolling pin and stabbed her in the back multiple times as Anne collapsed to the ground. Matt poured the gasoline all around her body. He then walked up the stairs with the knife in one hand as he covered the stairs with the ignitable fluid in the other. Matt poured some into the doorway before he opened his mother's room, wielding the knife. His mother was in the restroom. He poured more around the room, dropped the knife, set the fire, and left. On May 7, 1999, Matthew B. Harper, now 22 years old, was given the maximum sentence permitted under a plea agreement for second-degree murder and arson, which was 35 years before any possibility of parole. Ironically, after he received his punishment, he made the first public statement regarding his actions. He addressed a full courtroom, including his family members and friends, and stated, and I quote, "When I think about my sister, I think of a beautiful young woman. I miss her every day. I can't believe I took her life, but I know that I did. Although no one came to testify on behalf of Matthew Harper, the circuit court judge did receive many letters from his family and friends, including 2 from his mother Elizabeth, asking him to consider a lighter sentence for her son. His mother wrote, and I quote, "The only possibility of redemption for me is the possibility of some kind of new life with my son." There is no additional information as to what she may have meant by these words. However, it was speculated by investigators and prosecution that since Elizabeth Harper had already lost her daughter, she couldn't bear to lose her other child. Perhaps she blamed herself for what happened and felt responsible in some way for turning Matt into the monster he became. I don't know. I personally have a difficult time believing that he repressed the memory of bludgeoning and stabbing his sister to death, pouring gasoline on her body and setting it on fire. There is strong evidence that his actions were completely premeditated. He expressed remorse and confessed, but it sounded to me as if it were choreographed to solely benefit himself. The prosecution had strong evidence, and when he realized that he would likely be convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, in order for him to have a chance of freedom one day, he knew he had to strike a plea deal. I hate that this happens so often. I do understand that it is frequently used to ensure that at least some form of justice is found, but in this case, I think there was ample enough evidence to prove that Matt Harper intended to commit arson and murder. So what is there to say about this unusual and horrifying type of homicide? The kind of siblicide that is discussed here is radically different from that of an honor killing, where a brother murders his sister, often by the direction of one or both parents or another relative, in response to her dishonoring the family in some way. This type of homicide involves very distinct motivations and cultural factors that are not present in the other form of siblicide as described in this case. The research on non-honor siblicide killings has been unfortunately minimal, but certain patterns have emerged from what has been studied and analyzed over the last 60 years. The act of when a sibling murders another brother or sister is called siblicide. Specifically, when a brother is killed, it is called fratricide, and if a sister is murdered, it is called sororicide, taken after the Greek terms for sister and brother. Although murders within the family occur more frequently than most of us like to believe, they are still uncommon. Amongst family murders, the act of siblicide is an extremely rare event. On average, out of all interfamilial homicides, siblicide only happens in around 2% of cases, with a national data range between 1 and 8% occurring in the United States every year. A brother killing their brother has the highest rate, with a brother killing their sister being the lowest. Which sibling is more likely to murder their brother or sister? Research, again, is limited, but it has been mixed. Studies done in Britain, Canada, Japan, and in the specific area of Chicago in the United States have revealed that younger siblings are more likely to kill their older siblings. It has also been determined that the vast majority of individuals who murder their siblings are adults. One empirical analysis showed that siblicide as a teenager is very rare, occurring in 9% of cases, whereas 78% of cases involved adult offenders and adult victims. It was noted that the victims are usually within only a few years of the offender. The average age of the offender and the victim is between 33 and 34 years old, with the peak ages between 20 and 30. This range of age coincides with the most common age group of violent criminals, specifically those who commit homicide. A multinational study that was conducted across 75 countries found similar results. The lowest percentage of 123 victims in this study was between 12 and 19 years old at only 2%. The second lowest was 60 years and older with only 3%. 9% of siblicide cases were committed by children under the age of 12, Interestingly, the age groups of 20 to 29 and 30 to 59 committed 43% each of all the studied cases. Analysis of siblicide found that similar to other homicides, sibling murders use firearms and knives significantly more than other types of weapons, with firearms being the number one method. The other relatively common way to kill a sibling involved the use of blunt objects, asphyxiation, personal weapons, which I'm not sure what that entails exactly, and strangulation. The presence of alcohol or drugs is known to be a common element in the crime of killing one's sibling, specifically alcohol. Although it was not acknowledged in any reports I came across, a blog that was written by an acquaintance of both Matthew and Ann Harpers mentioned that it was believed by her mother, amongst others in the community, that Matt had been actively using cocaine at the time of the incident. Now, of course, no substance abuse is the primary trigger to commit such a violent crime. However, combined with other traits like antisocial personality disorder, which, based on the details of the case that profiled his character, it seems in all likelihood Matt Harper was inflicted with. Then there were issues of sibling jealousy and the recorded aggressive behavior toward his victim. Another common characteristic of siblicide is money, or what equates to money tied to property or land. Siblicide perpetrated by an offender's mental illness and developmental disabilities is very rare, but there have been exceptions to the rule. Regarding siblicide between youth versus adults, youth are categorized as individuals under 21 years of age. So in the case of Matt and Harper, they were considered non-adult offenders and non-adult victims. In such acts of siblicide which occur between siblings 21 years or younger, the proximity thesis has been proposed to help explain some of the factors that may come into play. The proximity thesis suggests that younger siblings who share the same home as they grow up compete for parental approval and attention. As a result, they often engage in relationship conflict behaviors. Jealousy, rivalry, and competition are significant factors that could motivate one sibling to kill the other. There is also the family subsystem. This involves parent-child and parent-parent relationships that influence the way siblings interact and relate to one another. How a parent treats one child has a strong effect on the other sibling. Each sibling's behavior and feelings are influenced by these relationships, and if they are treated differently by the parent than their sibling is, this can elicit aggression and violence toward the preferred sibling. Although Matt Harper never acknowledged such feelings, I think it would be safe to say that he held some resentment and envy toward his sister Anne. From all accounts, she was the golden child, and there was a part of him that hated her for that. Since the research is limited to sibling homicide, the identification of potential risk factors has been difficult. Some pretty obvious signs, though, would include unintentional or accidental siblicide of another, sibling abuse, domestic violence, easy access to firearms, neglectful parents, substance abuse, and when siblings live with each other as adults. In terms of philosophy, the concept of sibling rivalry and the death wish of a sibling was previously explored by the late Sigmund Freud. The late philosopher Alfred Adler theorized that birth order influenced the relationship between siblings, with a focus on firstborns being tyrants, who felt dethroned and threatened by the arrival of their younger siblings, who have a tendency to be selfish and lazy. He considered that firstborns are in a place of constant struggle to hold their place as being first. Although there is little to no evidence to support his theory, it is interesting to note how the placement of birth may increase feelings of hostility between siblings. Time will tell if Matthew Harper has redeemed himself enough in the eyes of the law to receive parole when he is first qualified for release from prison in 2029. Since entering prison, he has completed undergraduate and graduate degrees, worked as a chaplain's assistant, is the leader of a religious community, is a tutor for incarcerated GED students, has become a published author, and trains therapy dogs. In fact, as of today, he writes scripture and words of inspiration to fellow Christians, which is available to read online. Matt Harper's status as a model prisoner is hard to deny. And we all know the society loves a good redemption story. What do you think? Do you think Matt Harper committed premeditated first-degree murder? Or do you think it was more of a crime of passion per se? He got caught just trying to burn the house down for the money, but didn't necessarily want to commit murder? I think it's pretty obvious that he had all intentions of killing both his mother and sister, or at the very least, his mother. And Anne got in the way. She wasn't going to let him just pour gasoline around their family home and not cry for help. So he did what he felt he had to do, and he brutally murdered his sister. I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder happening on the streets next door, especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, written, researched, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original music composed by Stereocode.